Bellantoni. I'm a White House correspondent for the Washington Times in Washington, D.C.
All right, and you came to our attention because I was reading some of the presidential pool reports, or the presidential-elect pool reports that you did. Can you tell us a little bit about what the presidential-elect pool is?
Sure. It's what's called a protective pool, which means anytime Barack Obama has left his house or the privacy of a building where he would not be going somewhere else, a bunch of reporters follow him in a van in the motorcade. And the motorcade is very long, can be 10 cop cars. He's in an SUV. There's another SUV with people with guns. And the press van is usually the very last one. And it will be a print pooler, which is what I was. It's someone from a newspaper that is responsible for submitting a pool report to everyone so that they know what he did that day. But also in the van are members of the wire services. So you'll have Reuters, AP, Bloomberg. You'll also have a television pool reporter. So someone from Fox News could be what's called a protected pool reporter for TV. And they had embeds throughout the campaign trail. People that lived on the plane with Barack Obama never left. They did it with each candidate. So most of the embeds are the ones that are still living in Chicago, following him every day to the gym, to taking his wife out for dinner, going, everywhere he could go, parties with the kids, taking the kids to soccer practice. I mean, this is, it's literally everything they do.
Why does Obama have a pool?
But Barack Obama had it earlier than any other presidential candidate in history, in part because he had Secret Service protection earlier than any candidate in history because there were concerns about his life. And there were threats against him, so he had Secret Service protection very, very early. The protective pool started over the summer before he was actually the nominee, which had never happened. And that was kind of a demand of a bunch of newspapers and also the networks here in Washington. Their bureau chiefs wrote a letter and said, we need to be with him at all times.
Okay. And so you had pool report duty recently. What was your day like?
Well, it starts much earlier than his day. You start for what's called a sweep, which is a security sweep where the Secret Service will open your computers and make sure they're legitimate. They turn on your BlackBerry and your cameras, everything. They go through all your stuff. And then they also have a bomb dog come and sniff all of your equipment. Then you get physically wanded with a metal detecting wand. You get to know the agents very well. So you and the whole group do that, and that usually takes an hour. And then you're pretty much waiting for him in a van. Right now in Chicago, they do it at like 5 a.m., where sometimes they're waiting in the elements outside while they get swept. Then they wait for him until he's ready to go. Sometimes you only get a glimpse of him leaving his house, waving as he gets into the car, sometimes not even that, and then you travel. So my day was a little different because we were in Philadelphia that day for a meeting of the National Governors Association. It was a little bit more interesting. He went to the gym, which was the first time he'd left, gone to a gym outside of his hometown of Chicago since becoming president. So there was a big reaction there, and they were actually wanting people as they went in to do their daily workout because no one knew ahead of time that the president-elect of the United States would be there. So then we went on to do some other events, and my responsibility is telling all the reporters in the world what he did, what he said, that they couldn't see themselves, things that weren't on television or with a bigger group of reporters.
All right. How much pressure do you feel when you're the only reporter who is telling all the other reporters what the president-elect is doing?
A lot. And it's good practice for being a White House correspondent, actually, because, for example, on Air Force One, if the press secretary does what's called a gaggle and speaks to reporters, it is somebody's responsibility to get the transcript out and get it out quickly. A lot of times the White House will do it on their own, but the president-elect's team is pretty minimal at this point. They don't have the resources to do that. So Rahm Emanuel, Obama's soon-to-be chief of staff, gave a briefing on the plane. I was responsible for getting a transcript to everyone, and I had to type it up while we were in the air and make sure that it got to people as soon as we landed in Chicago. It was a lot of stress, but it's also, if everybody takes it seriously and I take my responsibility very seriously, then everyone does a good job, and we all help each other get that information.
Okay, so other reporters on the ground would not have known what Rahm Emanuel was saying if you, Christina, had not been writing it up.
Right. Technically, the wire reporters, they are allowed within the pool rules to just call in their editors and say, here's what Rahm said. But the rest of the newspapers and TV and magazines and bloggers and sites like Politico, none of them would know if you hadn't put out the pool report. You would just get what the AP wrote about what he said. So I actually did a whole transcript, and I had a TV pool reporter help me. We double teamed on it to get it out quickly.
All right, and have you learned anything new about Obama, do you think, having been a pool reporter and watching him all day, every day?
Gosh, yeah. Well, his gym habits are the most interesting. I mean, he's very, very regimented. He goes to the gym, he doesn't sleep in. And I've been with him in a lot of unique situations, diners, bars. I went with him to a VFW hall once in Indiana where a guy gave him a can of Bud Light, and he drank the can of Bud Light there. And that's what they do with their campaigning. It's a little different once you're president, but so you do get to know them in a more intimate setting. He actually bought me and the rest of the pool ice cream once in Pennsylvania, I think it was. So you do actually get to spend a little bit more time. And that day on the airplane, Obama actually came back to the back of the plane to say hello to all the reporters. And it was the first time he'd really greeted people since winning the election. And people like me and a couple other reporters that he knew, he was like, oh, the gang's all here. And then he met the new reporters because it's a whole new crew that's going to come on and cover him as president.
Okay, and so there's a perception that Obama has gotten very positive press coverage in his post-election phase, maybe his pre-election phase.
Yeah.
Do you think, and sometimes we think about a honeymoon with the press before somebody takes office, do you think Obama's going to get that kind of treatment, is in your sense, as a incoming White House correspondent?
It's a great question, and we all debate this in the press a lot, because is putting somebody's face on the cover of a magazine in a flattering photo, is that positive coverage? Yes and no. I mean, in part, there's an enormous appetite for information about this man. When I was covering him at the gym, there was a passerby that actually gave me some grief about it, saying, I can't believe you cover him going to the gym. You should be covering him in a hard way. You're in liberal media. And that's just very interesting because there is an appetite for news about what he does at the gym. And his life, his daily life affected everybody else's daily life going to the gym that day. It shuts down traffic. And so there is a question of, do you need to cover every little thing? Will he get a honeymoon? Probably from some organizations. Already he's faced, tough questions. I actually think during the campaign there were a lot of tough questions, but you could add up things like the imagery. They were flattering photos of him on a front page. Well, maybe that's because his campaign was better about setting up flattering photos. I think that there are definitely elements of that. Some of it is bias, some of it isn't, some of it's just circumstantial.
Okay, and then last question. Do you know what to expect when you're the White House correspondent, so it's going to be a new beat for you?
It's going to be totally new. The first 100 days are going to be nonstop. I know that he'll be traveling a lot. We have a 3-person team, so we'll rotate the travel. But there's also going to be news coming nonstop. You'll have legislation coming out of Capitol Hill immediately. You're going to have him influencing the drawdown of troops in Iraq right away. You're going to have him making moves on the economy. So there's just going to be constant news. It's going to be a lot of working hours. But mostly we'll just be in the White House getting every bit of news that we can and traveling when he does.